We're going to talk about some notable improvements in translational research. One of the reasons we've been so successful in Massachusetts is because of where all the ideas start. It's at the world-class academic medical centers and academic institutions, and under the leadership of our moderator, my dear friend Abby Barrow, the Executive Director of the Office in Technology Commercialization Ventures at the University of Massachusetts. Abby, why don't you come up to the stage and you can introduce your panel. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bob. And we actually will take one chair away. Why don't you just come up? Yeah. Okay. So welcome. Thank you, Bob. And thanks to MassBio for all the work you put in on the pavilion. And also thanks to Eve this morning for the coffee. That was a very welcome sight when I arrived this morning. So I'm Abby Barrow. I run the Mass Tech Transfer Center, which was set up about 12 years ago to work with all the universities, research institutes, and hospitals in the state to try and help them commercialize more of the inventions that come out of their labs. So we do that through a combination of proof of concept funds, coaching and connecting the faculty members, showcase events, and as was mentioned earlier, we work on initiatives like the standard license for digital health that came out of mass competitive partnerships. So what we've seen a lot in academia is a lot of changes in the type of research that they're doing and a lot of attempts to get closer to product research and to show proof of concept, and that's part of what we fund internally. We're also seeing a lot of changes in who works in academic institutions. We actually joke a little bit that actually our academic institutions are now being staffed by industry researchers and corporations are being run by academic researchers. If you look at David Altshuler, who moved from the Broad Institute to Vertex, that's just one example of an academic researcher going into a corporate setting. So our panel today is going to address these changes from their different respective positions. So I'm going to get them to briefly introduce themselves and what they're doing, and then we'll go into some questions and then open it up for questions as well afterwards. So Maud, why don't we start with you?
It's on already? Okay, sorry about that.
Speak right into it, you.
All right, so thanks everybody. Thank you for the invitation to participate in the panel today. So my name is Maud Tessier. I am Director of Business Development and Licensing in the Merck Boston Innovation Hub, which is based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So we're the local business development unit of Merck. And my job is really to find, evaluate, and transact on preclinical oncology opportunities. Been at Merck for about 1.5 years, and prior to that, spent about 5 years at Boston Children's Hospital, where I was leading the business development and marketing team within their technology and innovation development office. And prior to that, spent some time also in the biotech area doing business development and project management, and was originally trained as a scientist where I did cancer biology.
Great. Why don't we go to Peter next?
Morning. I'm Peter Reinhart. I direct the Institute for Applied Life Sciences at UMass Amherst, and I'm one of these people that has kind of come full circle. I started my life as an academic at Duke Medical Center. I started a biotech company out of that. I moved to large pharma, first Wyeth and then Pfizer after that, and have now come back full circle to academia, heading up this institute to really try to become an interface between academia and industry, and learning some lessons along the way that I'm sure we'll get into as the rest of the questions go on.
Okay, Joyce.
Good morning. I'm Joyce Wong from Boston University. I'm a professor in biomedical engineering, and my expertise is in biomaterial science and engineering, and I'm primarily interested in developing biomaterials for detection and treatment of cardiovascular disease, and that includes contrast agents like ultrasound and MRI, but also vascular tissue engineering. I'm also director of a provost initiative at Boston University to promote women in STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. It's called ARROS, which stands for Advance, Recruit, Retain, Organize Women in STEM. And our goal is to basically make sure we're not losing any talent, to make sure we can move things forward.
Great, thanks. So as you can see, we've got a very qualified panel with us this morning. So maybe, Peter, I'll start with you. You're running a new center. You've recently moved back from industry to academia. So what are the key challenges an institution faces as it seeks to engage in more translational research?
Yeah, it's a really complex question. On the one hand, you're taking a large organization that knows how to do basic research, knows how to write individual investigator research grants, and trying to have it become an innovation engine that knows how to partner with industry. And I'd say some of the key challenges are cultural, really having academics understand what it means to be contributing to a research program that has a defined milestone and a real timeline attached to it, which is very different than basic research, which meanders along and comes up with new findings, but there is no specific milestone, no specific objective, and no real timelines in place. So making that sort of cultural shifts is an important transition. The other one is moving from an individual sport to a team sport. Academia is really optimized to individual excellence, each lab doing its own thing. As you try to coordinate larger research efforts that have multiple contributors to that effort, it becomes a much more difficult challenge. There's no infrastructure to support that. The faculty don't have a good reward structure in place for rewarding them for these efforts. And of course, that's exactly what industry is looking for, is a project that has multidisciplinary support with enough organizational structure behind it that you can actually get to a milestone in a reasonable time frame. So I'd say the cultural shift that's needed on a campus is probably the biggest hurdle.
Great. So Maud, your center is also new at Merck. So can you tell us a bit about the background of your center and why it was created?
Sure, yes, happy to. So our Merck Boston Innovation Hub was founded in 2014. And the goal was really for Merck to have a greater access to external innovation, especially in the early stages. And so we can work with academics, we work with biotechs, we have a strong relationship with the venture capital community in Massachusetts. And, you know, for us, it's really all about supplementing our pipeline. So our main focus is on the therapeutic side. We also do some deals on the platform side as well, so looking at different technologies that might help us develop medicines better. And we're responsible for really finding and transacting on opportunities that are before human proof of concept, which for Merck is phase 2. As I mentioned at the beginning, my main focus is oncology, so all the opportunities I look at are preclinical, which are very early for a pharma company. And in Boston, we actually have a team of 7 people. So we have search and evaluation professionals as well as transactionalists that are co-located with us. And I think that really helps us to be able to take a project from beginning to end at a local level, have a lot of face-to-face interactions, be really integrated into our community, which is really vibrant in Massachusetts. And, you know, for us, I think it's also about making sure that we are really on the pulse of what are emerging areas of science, right? And obviously academia is a big part of that ecosystem. So it's really about us being able to partner on groundbreaking technologies. We're not looking for incremental improvements. We're really looking for strong science with really interesting, smart people who want to work with us to really benefit patients.
Great. So Joyce, you've had a pretty traditional academic career so far. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what your motivation has been to get more involved in translational research.
Absolutely. So I have worked a fair amount with industry, and I want to echo what Peter said, is I think it's important in academia. So my colleagues in industry always tease me and say, you guys don't have any deadlines. You may have a grant deadline or this, but that's not a real deadline, right? And you don't have the pressures that you have in industry. And so I think by me working with several different companies, that exposed me to kind of the technology readiness levels, go, no-go metrics, and so I think that was really fabulous. I also participated in the NSF I-Corps, which is the Innovation Corps, which is really, the founder is Errol Arkalik, who was the NSF, National Science Foundation Program Director of this, and this really, so I participated in this last year, and it was really wonderful because I am in the process of wanting to do a startup company, and I had always talked to my colleagues who have started a company, and I asked them, how did you do it? And they never really give you a straight answer. They're like, oh, you kind of have to go in it, and you make a lot of mistakes. But what Arkalik and NSF has done is they've broken it down into a 6-week intensive boot camp, which uses Lean Launchpad, and it's really fantastic. I recommend it to anyone. And so actually there's, just really briefly, there's the principal investigator and also an entrepreneurial lead. In this case was one of my PhD students who was close to finishing, and then an industry mentor. And so that was really a fabulous, it was basically doing over 100 interviews where you kind of define what your product will be. So that was really transformative for me. And so it made me realize that you have to have all the stakeholders, the team players early on in the process, and not waiting until like 20 years later and finding out that your research is really irrelevant and, fine for academia, but really stuck in the ivory tower.
Yeah. So maybe, Peter, why don't we sort of follow on with that theme a little bit and think about how you incentivize individual investigators and groups of faculty to really engage more in translational research, and kind of what you're trying to set up at UMass Amherst to do that.
Yeah, I'd say in terms of incentives, there are really two, and they're both difficult for different reasons. The first one is financial. If you want to put a multi-investigator team together that advances a project to a point where an industry partner might be interested, there are often gaps in the data package. Each lab is at a slightly different position. Some people have cell-based data. In some cases, animal data might be missing. There isn't good cohesion across them. So nearly always, you will need to do some backfilling to actually create a project that an industry partner would be interested in. There is no good financial model to fund that through NIH or NSF or other agencies. So you need to come up with an alternative way of doing it. And frankly, I think UMass has been very innovative in the solution they've come up with, which is they actually take a fraction of the indirect rates that comes from individual investigator grants that have an interest in translational research and feed that back to the Institute. So we are in a position that we can offer seed funding to multi-investigator groups that want to create a larger effort that potentially could be partnered with industry. So that's one of the issues, coming up with some money that can actually drive the process forward. The second issue is actually a little bit more complex, because you need to create an environment where the participants to an effort like that feel rewarded. And academia has the traditional reward system, tenure and promotion, that largely recognizes papers published and standard grant dollars brought in the door. And there is no value system yet that recognizes industry partnerships or patent applications or developing a patent estate in a particular area. And until you can actually get promotion committees that are largely made up of other faculty and university administrators, until you can get them bought into the concept that there is an expanded currency of value generated by faculty that contribute to these efforts, faculty will not feel that they're getting the support and value from their administration. And the tendency will be to keep going back to the things they know how to do best, which are single investigator grants. So to change that cycle, again, needs some cultural shifts, but this time largely with university administrators and promotion boards.
So yeah, Maud, please jump in.
Yeah, just a couple of more comments on that line, maybe as a shout out to my former employer, Boston Children's Hospital. At Children's, they have a technology development fund where the hospital's own money is invested in commercially promising technologies, and the goal is really to advance the stage of those opportunities to a point where they're perhaps a little bit more attractive to a commercial partner. So it's really funding these value-generating experiments that would de-risk the project. And so that's been in existence for about 5 years, and it's been quite successful in generating a number of startups in the area, as well as licensing deals. And it's meant to be an evergreen fund as well. And so a portion of the licensing income then goes back to supporting the fund, so that pool of money is replenished. The other comment I would make is that on the academic side, I think most institutions have an IP policy that really shares in the licensing income with the department, usually the endowment fund of the university, for instance, and a portion of that also goes to the inventor. So it's certainly an incentive, right, to on the financial side to participate in a little bit more kind of translational or commercially oriented research. Having said that, in my experience, no one does it for the money, right? I think everybody does it for, obviously, the mission of their institution, and I think their goal of increasing knowledge and helping people. But that's certainly part of the incentive for at least a fraction of the people, is that there is some sharing in the revenue.
So Mo, let's just continue with you in a moment, and now with your Merck hat on. Obviously, when you were at Children's, what your researchers thought of as advanced work was really quite early for industry. So can you talk about, now you're at Merck, what you're looking for in your early stage collaborations, what you'll consider for the stage of development? What do they need to have shown? Do they need to have done some animal studies? What sort of data are you looking for?
Sure. And so, our group at Merck is really focused on early stage partnering. So we actually don't have, I would say, a lower threshold in terms of a data package that one needs to see. Our group is really tasked with doing strategic deals. So in a typical project, there would be some IP that already exists, right? So it can't just be an idea that somebody has come up with. We need to see some sort of data. But having said that, it's hard to come up with a one-size-fits-all answer to that question. In my perspective, I think the amount of data that one needs to have a compelling story for us to be able to really sell it to our senior management, which are ultimately internally the people that I need to convince, right, to spend some money on a deal, varies from project to project, right? I think it's very different if you're talking about, a platform technology that's maybe answering a key drug development problem that our industry has had for a number of years, versus maybe an asset that's a therapeutic molecule against a target that's well validated versus something that's brand new. What I will say also is that we've done deals in a number of different stages. So we've done deals with companies that had in vitro data only, and that's partly because the data that they shown us was really strong, and again, it answered a key problem that we had for a number of years. And similarly, we did the Harvard deal recently, which was announced in late March, where we in-licensed and are continuing to collaborate with Harvard on a novel series of small molecule oncology drug candidate. And, that program was, for an academic institution, very advanced. It was sort of in late preclinical development. And so, our group is really looking at emerging areas of science. We're really looking for these groundbreaking technologies that will, at the end of the day, I think, be able to make a big difference in how patients are treated. And so for us, there's no lower threshold. But I think obviously different companies may have different perspective on that, but that's the mission of our group. And I think, on the business development side, I think it's also our role to craft partnerships in a way that addresses the risks that are inherent to the project. And so we are equipped within our group to really design the partnership structure that will address the early stage of the projects that we partner around.
Great. So Joyce, you talked a little bit earlier about doing ICOR and things, but how do you see your approach to research changing, having been sort of exposed to more translational needs and having done ICOR? Has that really changed how you're working in the lab?
Yes, I would say it was very, it changed me in a way that I've recognized the importance of having IP which I know both of you have emphasized the importance of. And I think that again is something, as you mentioned, Peter, is not traditionally rewarded in the tenure and promotion cases. But I think with, as you mentioned, the funding pressures right now, is NIH having the lowest pay lines ever right now, and NSF having, not much funding, and who knows what's going to happen in November. So we don't know if that's going to even get worse, right? So I think it's important to recognize that what I've learned is you have to learn early on whether there's interest, right? It's a kind of tricky dance to do because you want to see the IP, and so we also are at that point where we have to convince our Office of Technology Development to actually to put the patent in. So I think that, to me, is probably the most challenging part. I would also add, too, that this is something I've thought about a lot, too, is traditionally the conferences that academicians go to do not intersect at all with industry. In fact, this is, I would think, this is the first time I've come to this meeting, but I know now to come to this meeting. But I think that's another important point, to say that there's actually very few collisions that occur. I think Boston, we're lucky, right, to have this. So I think those are the kinds of things. And in terms of, like, I know something else that I think a lot about is when I'm training my students, because ultimately they do want to go into industry because they're seeing the climate in academia, and unfortunately a lot of them don't want to go the academic route because they see kind of the climate, which is a totally different topic. But I think, again, trying to make connections in that way, where maybe having internships so the students themselves can learn what the needs are from industry. I think the more kind of connections we can make, the better, and earlier the better.
Yeah. So I don't know if any of the other two have comments on students. Students are obviously an integral part of what universities are all about, and training people. So
yeah, maybe I can say a couple of words about that. You asked me earlier about some difficulties in setting up a translational infrastructure on a campus that has not traditionally done this. I'd say that the strongest allies you have in trying to do something like that are, in fact, the students and postdocs. They seem to be coming in charged with an idea that some of the work that they're doing will actually contribute to improving human health and well-being. And they are the allies that end up convincing faculty mentors to get more engaged in areas like that. So on the one hand, they're allies. On the other hand, they also need an infrastructure and a reward structure that rewards them for having ideas like that. So we've tried to set up innovation challenges specifically earmarked for students that give them $30,000 or $40,000 to just spend 6 or 12 months to try a wild and crazy idea that they come up with. But the more you can do that, the better off you are. And I think the other group that I would love to get more involved are staff sitting within some of the, particularly the small and medium-sized companies, that could in fact reach out to academia, be trained on particular latest generation techniques or instruments, and come back into their position having been trained at the university. It's not one of the traditional university missions, but it could actually be a nice expansion of how universities interface with industries.
So Mode, you mentioned very briefly your recent deal with Harvard. And for a licensing deal to be front page news in the Boston Globe, it's big. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about that deal and why you entered into it, because I think you actually were the one that found that technology.
Yeah, that's true. So I was the lead BD professional on the deal team for the Harvard transaction. So we announced it in late March. And it's a license and collaboration agreement for a novel small molecule drug candidate in oncology. And it's from the lab of Matt Scher, who's a professor in the chemical biology department at Harvard. So terrific investigator, great track record of success, high profile person with a strong list of key publication in top journals. And one thing that we do as part of our Merck Boston Innovation Hub to engage academic institution is that we participate in a lot of the accelerator funds that are in town, or technology development funds. And so we provide a lot of ad hoc feedback about the different projects that they're thinking of funding through some of the mechanisms that we mentioned earlier. And so it's through that relationship with the Blavatnik Biomedical Accelerator at Harvard that I first learned of the project from Matt. And we were impressed by him, obviously, as well as by the project, right? Especially in early stage partnering. I think it's important to partner on, obviously, projects that we all believe in, but I think the strength of the team is also really important, and he's a very entrepreneurial-minded investigator, very translationally focused. And, we were impressed because in addition to having chemical matter, he also had a really deep understanding of the mechanism of action of his molecule. And so that really gave us a clear line of sight to the clinic. So we're able to, based on his working model, define a little bit better which patients may respond to his therapy, which we don't always see both of these components at such an early stage. And so, for us, we're continuing the relationship with him. As I've mentioned, there's a collaboration component to it. And I think in the early stages, it's really important to continue this deep relationship with the potential partner, whether it's in academia or in biotech. And, the Blavatnik Accelerator at Harvard has done a great job with promoting the development of some of their technologies within the university. And I think this one is the project that they've funded the most. And so they've really invested a lot of effort and time, I think over a 4-year period or so, to really take the project from, what was really, I think, a promising technology to really one where there's a concrete product candidate that a pharma company like Merck is now basically moving as fast as we can towards the clinic with.
So the one critical piece of data you didn't include in that was how big the upfront payment was. I can't let you get away with not mentioning that figure.
Yes. Well, we disclosed it, but I did omit it from my answer. So the upfront that we had for the deal was $20 million. I think, again, for us, I think when you're on the outside, it's a little bit sometimes challenging to interpret the deal valuations, whether it's this deal or any other deal. There's obviously a number of factors that go into valuing a relationship, but I think for Merck, as I've mentioned, it was sort of a combination of factors, which included the opportunity to work with Matt on a longer-term basis, obviously the value in this lead chemical series that he's come up with, and I think the fact that we really believe in his science, and we really believe that, at least in the short term, it will help patients that have acute myeloid leukemia, but we also see potential in other types of tumors.
Yeah. It was a great deal. It got a lot of press. But maybe, Peter, we can switch to you for a minute. So you're setting up this new center at UMass Amherst. So how are you trying to engage industry in your translational programs? Obviously, I know you aim to do the same as Harvard did with Merck, but what are you doing at the moment?
Yeah, so this is another area that universities usually don't have a lot of expertise in. The sort of business development and scouting functions that we're used to having in industry just doesn't exist in academia for the most part. You have an IP group usually, you have a transactional group usually, but true business development, going out and really marketing in a knowledgeable way the assets of the university, that's pretty rare. And so that's one of the things we are trying to implement through the Institute, to actually have outreach efforts. I spend at least 1 day a week, and we plan to do more than that, meeting with people in Boston and in the surrounding state and all through New England. As we identify potential partners that have overlapping interests with us, often adjacencies where we may have particular expertise, another partner already has a real strength in a particular area, and we realize that we are an adjacency to some of their strengths. So we will then reach out and open discussions, not in a generic way that says UMass Amherst has these 47 projects, are you interested in any of them, but in a much more targeted and knowledgeable way. But we come out and say we have this one project that might be adjacent to something that you're an expert in. Do you want to talk about that in a more meaningful way? Of course, that takes time and effort, and you need to, again, build up an infrastructure that's a little bit non-traditional for an academic environment.
So partnering at Bio is important for doing that?
I think it is. For me, bio is an important meeting, but it gets back to a point that was raised earlier, that you have the traditional academic meetings where you meet with your peer groups. Often you have the larger academic meetings where you're really establishing the reputation of your lab and the fact that you're a thought leader in the field, but you don't often go to meetings where industry partners are out looking for innovation and this sort of environment where you can, in a short period of time, have a number of partnering meetings in the sort of get-to-know-you space. And it's, again, not something that academia does traditionally.
So maybe we'll just finish up on a more general question, and maybe Joyce, you can jump in on this first, but what about the role, we've talked here about getting industry input, but what about the role of getting clinicians and other key opinion leaders in the science? Was that part of what you were doing in ICOR and part of what you're doing now?
Well, yeah, actually, interestingly enough, for the ICOR, what's really interesting is that I went to the New York hub, it was in Newark, New Jersey, but they forced you to go outside of the building, and so it was really kind of like daunting, right? Because here you are, you may not know any context, so it forced you to get a contact of a contact. So the one thing I actually did learn, I never really used LinkedIn that heavily, but then after doing ICOR, I realized, oh my God, I have to connect with everybody I possibly know, because that one LinkedIn connection could be a connection to another connection. And just to give you an example, so the product that we're thinking about has to do with cardiovascular, so we wanted to talk to a vascular surgeon. And so I had a contact who was at Mount Sinai, a former, academician who I'd known for a long time. So I just, out of the blue, cold emailed him and said, it's been a long time since I've talked to you, but do you have any contacts at Mount Sinai? So sure enough, he actually connected us to the chief of surgery, of vascular surgery, which was amazing, and he spent 2 hours talking to us. I mean, I couldn't believe it. Last minute, this was unbelievable, but it was clear to me that this, they have the term sometimes for cowboy surgeons, so this was clearly a cowboy surgeon we were talking to in terms of learning who's going to be your early adopters of your technology. So I think absolutely talking to the clinicians is really critical, because they'll tell you, this will work or this won't work, or we've tried this before. And so even just, actually interestingly enough, one of my collaborators is at Boston Children's Hospital. So part of my sabbatical a number of years ago, I actually watched the surgeries, and that was really fantastic, because then I realized, oh, okay, this is how you do something. And so I feel that the students need to do that too. So the clinicians, absolutely, because they are just full of different problems that they have, but there can also be challenges because they have a different language too. So sometimes it takes a while. It's a little bumpy maybe in the beginning, but I found those to be the most fruitful, actually having the clinician there as well. You really need them in the beginning. Yeah.
Peter and Maud, any other comments on getting clinicians and other opinion leaders to give comments and feedback?
Yeah, I think anytime you're talking about a translational effort, for me, translational means translational into the clinic. And you really do need to connect with that group early on. Sometimes academics are a little shy to connect with them early, thinking that it's going to be a long time before I have a clinical candidate, and I can always start connecting with them then. But I think it's so important as you start truly thinking about a particular therapeutic area that you might have efficacy in. You have a number of preclinical models that you've been working with, often cell-based, sometimes animal-based, but connecting them to what a clinician actually does to both diagnose and evaluate efficacy in patients is often so different that I really think the sooner you can connect with clinicians, the stronger the project will be.
Great. So I think we're almost out of time. We might have time for a question if anyone's got a question. Okay. So I'd like to really thank our panel this morning, and thanks to MassBio for having us. And of course, welcome to Massachusetts. We have lots of researchers, we have lots of companies, and we all like to talk about what we're doing. Thanks.